Hey everyone, it's Mark from Flight Sim School. Today I'm going to be covering how to land when there isn't enough space for a standard traffic pattern. Before I get to it though, if you enjoyed this video or any other video on this channel, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, put them below and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. I am on the ground at Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is around 5,900 feet up, and as you can see, I am in the middle of a canyon. There are very close mountains on either side of the runway, and it makes it practically impossible to fly a completely normal traffic pattern at this airport. I'm going to switch into slew mode to give you a better idea of what we're dealing with and just to show you around the area. Alright, so I'll just give myself a little bit of altitude here, just to have a better idea, and I'll back myself up so we can see the runway in the distance right there. So as you can see, there are mountains to the left and mountains to the right as well. Normally this airport you would fly a traffic pattern just like most airports, but because of that ridge that's just off in the distance there, it's going to be really hard to fly the standard pattern. There's about 300 feet difference between the runway and that ridge just off to the right. A normal traffic pattern would leave me a little bit too close to the ground when I'm flying over that ridge. I also had a look to see what the recommended runway for landing is here, and it's definitely runway 32, mostly because of the city on the other side of the ridge right here. There are some noise restrictions, so landing from the south avoids all of that. Even if the wind conditions were favorable, landing on runway 14 isn't a great idea, because if I back myself a little bit more, you can see that runway 14 is going to bring me dangerously close to the side of that mountain on the left. I am coming in from the north for landing, and I want to land on the south runway. Like I was just saying, if I was at a normal airport, I would just fly the normal standard left-hand traffic pattern, and I would get down on runway 32 no problem. Even in these conditions, what I've seen online from recommendations from pilots is to fly a standard traffic pattern as much as possible. I don't see it as being feasible to do here because the mountains are just too close on either side, so I use a modified landing technique. I'll give you an idea of what that landing is going to look like with slew mode first, and then I'll fly it for real. So what I would do is I would actually, instead of flying the normal traffic pattern, is I would fly right over the airfield and just continue heading south while maintaining a safe altitude with the mountains on either side. What I'm going to do once I feel that I have enough space on either side of the canyon is I'm going to do something called a teardrop turn. What I'll start by doing is turning outwards a little bit, and then I'm going to make effectively a U-turn around the canyon, and then I'm going to come back to line myself up with the runway and then just come in for my normal landing. When I'm actually flying this, what I would do is I would also choose an abort location and elevation so that when I'm doing the teardrop turn, if I see that I'm not going to have enough place to safely complete the turn, that I know what I'm going to do and where I'm going to go. In this case, when I'm making the turn, if I see that I'm getting too close to the mountains, I'm going to end up just turning back towards the wider part of the canyon and escape that way. I'll give you a few tips on how to make the turn as tightly and as safely as possible without putting the plane in danger as I'm flying the landing. The last thing I wanted to add before I fly this flight is that if I were doing this for the first time and I wasn't familiar with the area, I would either end up doing a scouting trip like I'm doing right now, or most likely is I would end up flying over the runway a few times just to get my bearings and get a better sense of the area and how I want to land at that airport. Each airport is going to be slightly different, but remember that the main thing you want to do is you want to try and keep your traffic pattern as standard as possible. Alright, so with that in mind, I'm going to get into position and I'm going to try and fly that landing as I'm coming out of my cruise descent. Alright, so I am flying over the airfield right now, and as you can see, I am flying in the Cessna 208 Grand Caravan today. It's one of my favorite planes for flying in the country just because it's got that extra power with the turboprop engine. It gives you a little bit more flexibility if you get yourself into trouble. So all I'm doing now is I am trying to stay a little bit to the left of the airfield, just as if I was flying a normal traffic pattern. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep flying towards the south until I've reached a point where I feel the canyon is wide enough and safe enough for me to make a successful teardrop turn back towards the runway. I've also got to keep an eye on the ridges below and in front of me here. They're significantly higher than the bottom of the canyon, so I want to make sure that I've got enough space between me and the ground. And I think I should be all right at this altitude, but I'm going to try and maintain it until we get to the point where we want to turn around. So what I'm going to do is I am going to fly just past the golf course, which is below me at the moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my turn to the left. And like I was saying in the briefing a couple of seconds ago, what I am going to be looking for is once I get to the halfway point of my turn, I'm going to see if I think I'm going to have enough space to complete my turn. And if I don't, then what I'll do is I'll turn back towards the south and escape that way and try my turn a little bit further downfield. So we are pretty much at the point where I can start my turn now. So the two tricks that I recommend when you're making a tight turn is to obviously fly as slow as possible. The easiest way to do that, of course, is to extend the first level of flaps if you're in the white section of the altimeter. In my case, I am, so I'm going to extend that first level of flaps now, and it's going to give me a slightly lower airspeed and a little bit more play when I'm making the turn. Obviously, traveling slower means you're going to cover a smaller distance over the ground, which is going to allow you to make that turn as tight as possible without putting the plane at risk. The other thing I'm doing is I'm trying to keep a turn bank angle of around 25 to 30 degrees. Anything more than that, and it becomes really hard to control the airplane. You might have a higher descent rate than you want, or an ascent rate that you definitely don't want in this case, since we're coming to land. And I find that 25 to 30 degrees is just that perfect level of bank angle, which doesn't make you lose control of the airplane too much. All right, so I am turned back around now, and I'm just going to complete that teardrop turn by flying back towards our flight path that we came on, which was just along that ridge on the left there. The runway is just on the other side of the mountain. It's very deceptive. You can't really see it, but the mountain that's on the right is hiding the runway for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my descent, and I'm going to try and get around a 300 to 400 foot descent rate. The runway is at around 5,900, so I need to get down a fair bit so I don't have to have an unstable approach down to the runway. I'm also going to make sure not to get too close to that ridge on the left. I want to make sure that I've got enough distance there and enough altitude to avoid an accident that may cause me to crash. Now, the other thing that I do when I'm landing in canyons is I will try and have a slightly steeper descent rate than I normally would. The slightly steeper descent rate is going to give me a little bit more flexibility in terms of if I need to make some last minute changes, I'll have a little bit more altitude to play with than if I was doing a normal landing. So we can see the runway is there. So since I'm doing the short field, I am going to extend full flaps to get my airspeed as low as possible, and I'm going to line myself up with the runway, and I'm trying to hold around a 4-degree descent rate down to the airfield. So my airspeed's all right, and I think my descent rate is just about right as well. I can see that my airspeed is pretty stable too. You can see that little purple line that's disappearing, which means my airspeed should stay pretty much where it is if I keep this descent rate down to the runway. And all I'm going to do is just follow this slightly steeper approach down. It's going to be a little bit more aggressive than usual, but that's okay because it's stable. I'm not dropping down a ton all of a sudden. I'm just keeping that descent rate as stable as possible the whole way down to the runway. And as I get closer, because it is a short airfield, I'm trying to reduce my power as much as possible because I want to make sure to come to a stop on the runway as soon as possible. And we're coming down now, and there we go, we are down. And I'll just press on the brakes to slow myself down that last little bit. And that's all there is to it. So I hope you learned something useful with regards to how to land in a canyon. If you have any questions or comments on what I did or how I did it, please make sure to put them below. And as usual, if you got any value, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.